please join me in welcome to the stage Brigadier General Paul Fredenberg, U.S. Army retired, Executive Vice President, Defense, AFCEA International.
Good afternoon, everyone. If you have not finished your lunch, please continue to enjoy as we begin this presentation. And first, I want to recognize our sponsor for today's lunch, Fincantieri Marine Group. Yesterday, we started to discuss capabilities and resources, and we asked ourselves if we were adapting rapidly enough to meet these new challenges. This morning, we discussed the importance of communicating effectively with the American people. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Admiral Sam Paparo, to continue that rich dialogue. The son of an enlisted Marine and the grandson of a World War II enlisted sailor, Admiral Paparo has continued this family tradition of service and became a naval aviator after receiving his commission from Villanova University. And if I have my timeline correct, you may have been there during that perfect game when Villanova beat Georgetown to win the NCAA basketball title. That must have been one heck of a time to be there. He has a long list of successful operational command tours and operational assignments at sea on top of his numerous academic credentials. But more recently, he was the Director of Operations at U.S. Central Command and the commander of the U.S. Fifth Fleet prior to assuming command of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, and he is now responsible for leading the Navy fleet in the largest maritime area of responsibility to maintain a free and open Indo-Pacific in face of China, our nation's pacing threat. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Admiral Paparo to the stage.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Good afternoon to all. Thanks very much. First, I'd like to thank General Lawrence and Admiral Daly for putting together and hosting this consortium of great minds. I'd also like to thank all the sponsors who are all here that makes this possible, too. I'd like to thank Chaplain Cho for that prayer. And Admiral Harris was telling me, you don't want to have a chaplain that does a better speech than you. And after that prayer, I got to tell you, I was really ready to just, okay, speech is over. We're all properly inspired to get after the mission, and let's eat and be on our way and start defending the nation. So, Chaplain, thanks very much for that terrific prayer. The richest part of our conversation today will come in the questions and answer session, and I'm at your service on that. But before we do so, I would like to prime the pump a little bit, taking us from the strategic to the operational and even to some extent to the tactical level in order to cultivate the thoughts that are going to inform the questions through which we'll be able to bring the collected intellect of all the people that are here in this room today so that we can attack the challenges that are facing the nation right now. And they are profound challenges at this time, as we discussed in the earlier panel this morning, hosted by Admiral Moran. We seek, the United States of America and our treaty allies and our partners, to uphold the international rules-based order. And we do so not out of a morality, although a morality is certainly a part of it. We do so because it is in the direct and visceral interests in terms of the security and the well-being of our nation and the entire solidarity of nations who also fully support the international rules-based order. The international rules-based order, it sounds like a fancy phrase that describes something, and it describes some really simple concepts, and the first is sovereignty. And sovereignty is the fact that the international community of nations, and most especially the United States of America, believe that nations do not change their borders with the use of force. This is the heart of the Taiwan policy, the one China policy and the strategic ambiguity that we talked to before. And Taiwan represents an inflection point. If the PRC unifies Taiwan by force to the mainland, this will set in motion a cascade of events across the entire Indo-Pacific that will directly affect the United States of America and our allies and partners. Under the weight of that economy and under the weight of that military pressure, Japan, South Korea, all of the vibrant economies of the Indo-Pacific, comprising 7 of the world's 10 largest militaries, comprising 60% of the world's economy. All of those nations are left with a critical choice, which is either to submit to the economic and political control that will undoubtedly follow, or to arm to the teeth and go nuclear. And neither of those scenarios is a scenario that's going to support the security and the well-being of our nation. Though that is the visceral choice that the nation has right now. Other elements of the international rules-based order: freedom of navigation, the United Nations Conventions on the Law of the Sea and the concepts of territorial waters, the concepts of exclusive economic zones. And you can see with excessive maritime claims, as discussed earlier in today's panel, in the maritime militia, in China Coast Guard, and their effects, their 9-dash line, their excessive claims in violation of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea and in violation of the findings of the Criminal Court, are all of a piece to deliver on a design that would reform the international rules-based order and would directly threaten our security and the well-being across 330 American citizens, those whom all of us, everybody, if you're in this room, it's because you're committed to supporting the nation. And I thank you for your service, whether you're wearing a tie or a uniform or a business suit. I salute your service. But these terms are visceral and they directly impact the United States of America. I have the incredible honor to follow in the footsteps of giants, some of whom that are here as the commander of the U.S. Pacific Fleet. And as the U.S. Pacific Fleet, and as Bridge Colby discussed earlier today, the theater is primarily maritime, the maritime domain in accordance with Joint Pub 3-32. The seas below it, the skies above, the estuaries, and all those areas in the littorals that can affect events at sea is the priority domain where we must defend this international rules-based order. I have the honor of serving as the Joint Force Maritime Component Commander for that, and I have an operational design that is designed to fly wing and support the objectives of my commander, U.S. Indo-PACOM, Admiral Chris Lung Aquilino, and I have the twin responsibility of making ready a force to support my other boss, the Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Mike Gilday. And this operational design, which I will discuss very briefly, is designed to meet the objectives of both commanders. And within this, I hope for you to visualize the operational environment so that we can work together to find solutions to deliver on that very urgent, very exigent goal of defending the nation and its well-being and those of our treaty allies and our allies and partners throughout the world. And it begins with, and you may have read this in Matt Pottinger's paper, it is open source, but the idea we talked earlier, Rep. Lauria was talking about operations in time and space. And so broadly, the nation and the allies and partners must deny the objectives inside the first island chain. Those objectives involve two things. The first is to cement by convention, by excluding others, from sailing and flying in international waters and international airspace in violation of the United Nations conventions. And then the second is to rehearse and intimidate for the forcible unification of Taiwan to the mainland. This is a part of a design that supports the rejuvenation of China, end quote. And that is the continued delivery of double-digit economic growth, that is the continued military modernization, and finally, the resolution of the Taiwan problem by force or not, by force, by intimidation, however you like. This deny those objectives is a critical element of the strategy. The second is to defend our partners and allies along the first island chain. Japan, the world's third largest economy, 125 million citizens, and our history before, during, and after the Second World War is inextricably linked in a rock-solid treaty alliance which we are obliged to fulfill. The Philippines, again, our histories are inextricably linked, a treaty obligation that we are obliged to defend. Thailand, a treaty ally whom we are obliged to defend. Australia, a treaty ally with whom we are obliged to defend, as well as all of the partners throughout the Pacific, and again, 7 of the world's 10 largest militaries, 50% of the world's population, 60% of the world's economy, enormously vital to the security and the well-being of the United States of America. And the third is, when operating outside the first island chain, to dominate, and that is to demonstrate overmatch at all times. At all times, our competitors should look out and say, and I've heard Admiral Harris say this maybe 1,000 times, today is not the day. Today is not the day to upend the international rules-based order, to do this by force. The temptation is to quick execute an action and then to de-escalate before the force that would do some punishment mission can arrive, and to de-escalate the situation politically. This is why I have not yet had the pleasure of reading Bridge Colby's book yet. And are you in the audience right now? I'm sorry? Okay. But we have to execute a strategy of deterrence by denial, to fill the battle space and to demonstrate that to upend this order entails the potential of instant costs that exceed that which can be gained by the use of force. Our lines of effort, when we talk about lines of operation, those are operations in time and space. When we talk about lines of effort, this is categories of activity. The first is to build and demonstrate dynamic combat power. Be confident in who you are, because the United States and its allies and its partners has a profound and a disorienting capability to impose costs. To build that combat power, no deterrence is going to be effective without the prospect of actual combat power. At the heart of any deception, at the heart of any cognition on the part of an enemy, there must be the actual and authentic capability to deliver overwhelming, timely, accurate, and lethal fires against a competitor in order to determine on that day, today is not the day, and if it is the day, it's the worst day of their lives. And building that combat power and demonstrating it are key to executing deterrence. Deterrence is an enemy's knowledge that you possess the capability and the will to impose those costs. Each is important, and you must be there. To build it means, from a Title X standpoint, is that in the places where we train to the high end, we've got to have the capability. And to demonstrate means that there must be a contact layer that can impose early costs and can be an on-ramp for other forces that can bring quickly those overwhelming fires. The second line of effort that we have is to strengthen alliances and partnerships. I sometimes see this expressed as strengthen allies and partners, which has a paternalistic view, a patronizing view. And that's not the Indo-PACOM strategy, and that's certainly not the U.S. Pacific Fleet strategy. Each is a sovereign nation, and in fact, it's that sovereignty that we believe that's so essential to our alliances, that's so essential to the order itself. So respecting that we are a come-as-you-are team of a solidarity of nations, it's that ability to plug and play with our partners per each nation's sovereign wishes to knit together that combat capability that will provide that deterrent effect. A third element of my lines of operations is to improve theater posture. What posture is, this is my own definition, so this may not be an according to Hoyle, but this is my definition. It's forces, its bases, its places, its access, its operations, activities, and investments across the theater. The posture for U.S. Pacific Fleet and for Indo-PACOM along Northeast Asia is about just right. But where we're underinvested is through the Southwest Pacific and in Southeast Asia in an arc of expanded maneuver and effects and an arc of contested logistics to be able to come at a competitor from multiple angles and in multiple domains across a wide-ranging geography. In some cases, we'll find partners are quite willing for full access, including the origination of strike operations from soil. And in some cases, it'll be a gradation. But to be able to gain that space, that expanded maneuver space throughout the Indo-Pacific region, including the Indian Ocean, is a key element of the strategy. And the fourth element of this is be more effective in info operations. That means the alignment of our top-level key messages, including how we listen to those messages. That is our affecting the cognition of our competitors. In order for an adversary to know that they're deterred, they must know that you've got the capability and the will to impose those costs. Our own control of what we know ourselves in terms of securing our networks and our assured C2. And the full range of how we communicate, and at least one half of communications is listening. You know, in your lives, you should strive to be, as we say in the radar biz, less than duty factor 0.5. You know, you're be in a good shape too. Like they say, God gave you one mouth and two ears. That's a good ratio to start with. Work from there. We had a discussion earlier this morning about what we need, and a number of folks have criticized the Navy for saying, you're not telling us what we need. And I'll lay it out plainly. It's not a change from my predecessor and my current boss. It's not a change from anything that I've seen. But the commoditization and the proliferation of long-range strike weapons means that we're no longer safe just based on geography. This is at the heart of distributed maritime operations, is that it's not like the old days when if they were outside of 40 miles, you were safe and we could outstick them. Everybody can outstick everybody else right now. So our first priority is the ability to counter an adversary's ability to see, understand, decide, and act through every single domain, to be able to dazzle, to be able to deceive, to be able to destroy those components that allow an adversary to exercise decision superiority. for ourselves. We must have an immediate, targetable picture of the space that we're operating in, and that ability to bring to bear lethal, accurate, long-range fires and effects against those elements that are going to enable us to meet our objectives. As my boss Lung says, a point-and-click picture that allows me to click and shoot. And then a priority is, in fact, those long-range fires, specifically Maritime Strike Tomahawk, hypersonics, conventional prompt strike. The list is long and glamorous of the capabilities that our great nation has brought to bear. We need them, we need more of them, and we need them faster, and that's what we need. And then finally, is that ability to sustain those capabilities under pressure, that consistent ability to sustain when an adversary is contesting that across 8 classes of supply, in terms of our medical capability, across the broad range of sustainment, which is more than just beans and bullets, but across 8 classes of supply, medical support, religious support, personnel support, that ability to sustain in this arc of contested logistics is absolutely vital. And before we open it up to questions, I'm going to leave us with one last thing, is that knowing what we know, we must be confident and have faith in our nation, in our allies, and our partners. We get into this temptation to say, woe is me, and why bother? This psychology of quit. I don't subscribe to it. I see what sailors, Marines, Coast Guard, civilians can do every single day. You know, as Father Cho said, that's the key advantage. He said, please bless us to build equipment, but most of all, let's support the innovation that's in this room, the values that underpin it. And if you didn't see that in action when we were talking about the performers of the quarter, the performers of the year, we're in the wrong biz. Let's remember who we are. Let's be confident in our capability. In my own duty position, I see what our adversaries do and can do. And I see what we do and what we can do. And although the curves can sometimes be disheartening, you never, ever bet against the United States of America, because we have a vote in this. This is an urgent challenge. Our nation has faced urgent challenges in the past and has always shown itself to be up to the challenge. In this room and across the country, we would prevail today, and we have the requirement among us all to ensure that we prevail tomorrow. And with that, I'll open the floor to any question on any topic that is germane to my duty position. Thank you.
Admiral, thanks for those remarks. This morning it came up about the Japanese, how they've increased their capabilities significantly, and politically they're showing more of an inclination to use those capabilities. What's your view on whether we need a forward JTF out there to bring that in the fold, or do you feel like we can still use our service components that are forward, like in the Navy's case, 7th Fleet, to do this?
Thanks, Pete. I appreciate that question. In our present design, Admiral Aquilino has directed us to act as a JTF every single day under a supported and supporting component model. And he's got the ability to do that. I was talking to Admiral Gortney here earlier, too. He's unique among commanders in his ability exercising COCOM to assign those tasks, and Pacific Fleet to a very large extent, actually Pacific Fleet in the maritime domain, which is where the very high majority of our operations take place right now, is assigned by Admiral Aquilino as the supported component to execute and to integrate those tasks. And so acting as a JTF every single day is a behavior that we're bringing to bear because, as we know, events happen quickly. We have less and less operational warning of events, and we can't deliver that startup current that's going to enable a command to build a JMD and to start the augments that come in to assume the status of a JTF commander. So we're doing JTF behavior every single day and JTF planning of operations, activities, and investments every single day under this supported and supporting relationships in order to build the habits of mind and habits of action that will support a JTF if the day comes where we're required to thwart some kind of kinetic action to upend the international rules-based order. 7th Fleet and 3MEF both enjoy profound partnered relationships with JSDF and to this day. And you brought up a point, which is we're seeing a more and more assertive Japan who is rightly being more assertive in response to greater threats to its sovereignty every single day. So I would not advocate for the stand-up of a JTF. My advocation right now is our continued operation as is, which implements the behaviors, the habits of mind, the habits of action that lead us to become a JTF. If there's a decision to stand up a JTF to begin those, there's no barrier to exercising over our networks and with our own liaisons those more and more integrated operations. And in Japan and in Australia, we see every single day cooperative deployments, cooperative activities that more and more have the look, the feel, and are authentically joint and combined operations every single day. And so I don't see the appointment of a combined JTF in the future, although I don't foreclose it. It's not in my decision space. It's in the decision space of my boss right now. Presently, I would not recommend it because I see it in action every single day. Thanks for that question, Pete.
Good afternoon, sir. I'm Lieutenant Junior Grade Kim. I'm a CB officer, just returned from a Indo-PACOM deployment. So I was in Japan, and it was when they published that Japan will interdict when it comes to a Taiwan crisis. I was talking to a Japanese self-defense force officer, and he gave me this perspective that kind of disturbed me. And when you brought up that we should avoid that paternalistic relationship between our partner forces, he basically told me that, hey, they felt like they had two choices, whether to submit to a close emperor, which is Beijing, or a hegemon that's afar, which is us. And as the guy on the ground, how do I talk to that? Do I say, that's the realist point? You are right to submit to the hegemon afar? Or should we take a more values-based approach by saying, hey, we're not a hegemon, we are a partner. However, but somehow we're the more senior commander. For example, in South Korea, the UN headquarters commander is still an American four-star. Or if we were to form a JTF, likely an American admiral would be in charge of defending that region. How do I bridge that gap with our partner nations?
Thanks for that. I appreciate that very much. I appreciate your keying on the word hegemony. I don't think as a Lieutenant JG I would have had the academic capability to do that too. Admiral Fogo taught me the meaning of the word in 2012 or so when I was a senior captain, just prior to working for Admiral Gortney, where my vocabulary went back a long way. So I want to thank you for that too. I think being assertive, I think being very assertive is a part of transcending that patronizing thought. Is that I would say, hey, I'm ascribing your use of the term hegemon as a language barrier because it in no way describes the relationship. We're allies, which means that in a mutually sovereign way, each nation acts in accordance with its interests, and we have decided to intertwine our nation's fates with an alliance that obligates each other to come to its assistance. And that is fundamentally an equal relationship. Certainly, there are differences in the amount of force that can be brought to bear as a function of the size of our nations and as a function of the size of our economies. And the United States sees that it's a responsibility to devote this element of its GDP to its treaty allies. And I will accede to an accusation of hegemony if you can cite for me one example in the post-war order where your hand, Japan, was forced by the United States to do something. And if you can't instantly tell me that, then it's not a hegemonic relationship. It's a relationship of mutual respect, of mutual interests, and that each player comes as they are and acts in accordance with their nation's sovereign will. And so how I would approach this and how I do approach this when I'm faced with a discussion of that is that if I am respectful and I am accountable of another person or another navy that I am dealing with, I'm going to speak plainly, because the relationships that we have demand that we speak plainly with one another and that we're honest with each other. And it involves the faith that, our deepest friendships will always involve resolutions on matters of disagreement. Your instincts on blanching at the term hegemony, where many young people would feel puffed up by that, but your blanching at that kind of demonstrates the values that young officers in the service have. And so I want to thank you for your question. I want to thank you for understanding that you're a strategic Lieutenant JG having a conversation with another, of your understanding that your words and your actions can have incredibly powerful impacts at the tactical level, with the strategic level. And I don't know where you came from, but I wish I was as good when I was your age as you are.
Thanks, sir.
Hi, Sam Legrone from USN News. The former UK First Sea Lord, when describing the CSG-21, said a big part of their model was, especially in the Western Pacific, was kind of a come-as-you-are approach, as you mentioned, in terms of ships and aircraft and units that can kind of peel on, peel off. Moving forward in the future, how do you go and create a construct where you can go and practically share information, targeting data, what have you, in order to make that work without sort of a more formal alliance?
Yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate that question. C2 is always people and systems. And in people first begins that leap that our nation must make, that if we are going to intertwine our fates with our alliances, we've got to be able to trust them with classified information, with the understanding that they'll be equally protective of our sources, technological and human, as we are. And so the first begins with getting the relationship right, including the information sharing, and to be able to share the kind of information for the operations that we're executing that ensure that everybody is operating under a common picture of what the adversary is doing and what we ourselves are capable with. And then the next element is trust among people. And that is finding every single opportunity that we can to work together to bridge cultural differences, to be in each other's company, to see that we can trust each other, and to build those personal relationships. And then the last, and what's frequently the longest pole in the tent, is the information systems that allow that kind of sharing that's plug and play that's going to allow that. And my boss, Admiral Aquilino, has as one of his priority an Indo-PACOM partner network that's modeled somewhat on the CENTCOM partner network, which is a system that allows us to share that information at those levels so that we are actively operating and communicating on a shared network. And we have to take every single opportunity that we can to train and to operate and to cultivate those networks every single time. And in a previous duty position, we operated with the French ship Charles de Gaulle, the aircraft carrier, as CTF-50, the Carrier Strike Group Commander, in a dual carrier operations under Subsit Alpha, by which we meant USS Eisenhower Carrier Strike Group was CTG 50.1, and the commander of the French group, Admiral Marc Assido, was CTF 50 and had tactical control of USS Dwight D. Eisenhower while Fifth Fleet maintained operational control of it. Exercising that over and over, it is a come as you are, and the more coming as we are, and the more converging that we have on that combination of the ability to information share, the relationships that's going to enable the trust, and the C2 systems that can link it all together so that we can all shoot, move, and communicate on a common operating picture to bring it to bear, and to practice this over and over and over again is going to serve us very well when that unforgiving moment comes. Thank you.
Admiral Rick Easton, retired Surface Warfare Officer, sir. Thank you for those very insightful remarks. I certainly learned a lot today. I think you sort of wrapped up your thoughts with talking about the 8 classes of supply. In this conference, there's been a lot of discussion about China and the number 1,700, I think, merchant ships that has been quoted, and of course, the size of their Navy growing. What are your concerns regarding our merchant fleet, MSC, and particularly MARAD? Are we exercising that sufficiently to really show our ability to maintain these long slocks and get the stuff and the material that we're going to need to fight a battle? And are you satisfied with the plans that are in place going forward?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mark. First, we have an incredibly capable, incredibly professional merchant fleet in the Maritime Sealift Command. The CLF force is an incredibly capable force, and that is augmented in times of combat by console tankers, by coastal tankers, by offshore support vessels, and we don't have enough. And we're going to need a ton of non-gray hull merchant capabilities to operate in this arc of contested logistics that's going to enable us to support the fleet. And it will be supplemented by gray tails and by white tails that fly in the air. It will be supplemented by ground modal transportation that is going to provide this network. I am not satisfied. I'm not sure we'll ever be satisfied. There's a number of, and I don't mean that as an expression of pessimism, but if you're operating at your best, you're never satisfied with where you are. You know, when you get to enough, you have to work towards being better, more integrated. And it is a key area that OPNAV N4, my own N4, the entire joint logistics enterprise is getting after every single day. And is the startup current going to be there? But the Jones Act and our own domestic shipbuilding capability is going to have to kick into high gear if we're going to be able to meet this threat. And I thank you for your engagement on that. It's, as I said, professionals think about logistics. Leader after leader has professed this, and it is incredibly true at this time. And 90% plus of the world's vital cargo moves by sea. So thanks very much. Jeff, good to see you.
Good afternoon, Admiral. Given the limitations of the littoral combat ship, would any of those vessels survive if a war broke out with China today?
Yes, they would. They absolutely would survive. And thank you for the questions. The littoral combat ships are going to fulfill some very effective roles in the fight that we imagine. And the first is, that they're going to operate with stealth and with speed. And this is the ability to affect how an adversary sees them, and they'll perform a highly effective role in littoral battle space, shooting, moving, communicating, in integrating with the littoral marine regiments, and imposing costs, in addition to that role that they fulfill in other theaters, freeing up your higher-end capabilities, such as cruisers, destroyers, DDX, and surface vessels to come for combat in the future. There is a role for littoral combat ships. Sometimes it is in ways that is going to free up higher-end capabilities to fight against higher-end threats. And then in some, it's going to be in that PT boat type role we saw in the Second World War, moving Marines from point to point, shooting, moving, communicating, when paired with the Marine littoral regiments, operating fires to channelize and to use the maritime geography to close channels, and we're gonna need them. The simple fact is, what we'll need are gray hulls with white numbers, with American ensigns flying on the stern, and with American sailors manning the guns. And I believe there's a role for littoral combat ships in my theater and others. Thank you for that question too. And you start the thing out with given the limitations of the littoral combat ship, every ship has limitations. And operational art is determining what that capability can do for you, divided by the risk of losing that capability, and fitting it into that puzzle as appropriate. Thank you for that question.
Afternoon, Admiral Jeff Gage with
Strain.
data miner and a Navy veteran. Take it back to a strategic level. I agree with the sense of urgency that you described, and I think everyone else in here does. Do you think that our 330 million odd fellow citizens between here and the Beltway agree with that? If so, can you share some evidence that you've seen? If not, what can we collectively do better to share that sense of urgency?
Thanks for the question, Strain. Good to see you. I think more and more the American public sees the threat. What they may not do is they may not be able to visualize the operational environment and the investments and the sacrifices that the country has got to make to meet that threat in the ways that it does. I mentioned earlier about how Taiwan is a key inflection point. If you're in the Quad cities, it might be hard to imagine how events in Taiwan affect a person in the Quad cities. Although as factories shutter and as your social media platform gets shut down, it could become viscerally true to you as a military campaign for Taiwan becomes a pattern of exploitation along the Pacific Rim, which becomes exploitation here within this nation as a result of that economic coercion. All of us have got to do a better job of enabling our fellow citizens who are smart. People in the Quad City are smart. Do you notice that earlier here today on the stage, a professed Democrat and a professed Republican agreed on almost every word each other made? We see bipartisan recognition of that, which is in and of itself a reflection of the growing realization across the country that this is the case. And now it becomes a matter of making the investments in all of the places where we need help in order to achieve that. And I come from a fairly humble place in southeastern Pennsylvania myself, and the folks in southeastern Pennsylvania, it's nothing like New York and it's nothing like Washington. It's a different place. And I see this in the people that I talk to back home that are concerned with it too. There's not a place I go where I don't talk to somebody who's concerned about this too. And I give great credit to the American people for recognizing that. So, I think there is a growing realization that this is the case. I think the information environment where you work more and more confirms this. And I have faith that the American public are up to this challenge as they have been to every challenge over the course of our 247 almost years. Thanks. Thanks, Train.
Sir, we have time for one more quick question.
Okay.
Admiral Bill Hamblett, Naval Institute Proceedings. I know you've got upcoming trips to, I think, India and Australia. A lot of has been written about the Quad over the last couple of years in our pages and others. As you meet with your counterparts and talk about China, where do you see the capabilities of the U.S., Indian, Japanese, Australian fleets coming together? Come as you are is great, but you got to build some capabilities and an exercise. Where do you see over the next couple of years the relationship between the Quad navies going?
Thanks very much. First, the Quad is a diplomatic arrangement, and I'm scrupulous in not assigning the Quad any military elements in terms of cooperation. Is the Quad in and of itself, per the policy of the United States of America and the policy of the partners who are also within that diplomatic arrangement, are focused on other instruments of national power. But there is a growing confluence of our national interests, and as an extension of that, of our military operations, activities, and investments that are supporting deepening relationships. So I'll say one key area between the United States and India is in maritime domain awareness, and with a particular emphasis also undersea. And this is an area where we can cooperate profoundly. And cooperating between our navies above the surface, more and more we are seeing this with operations out of Port Blair in the Andaman Sea, and in cooperative deployments and exercises. I'm going to India. I'll be in Visakhapatnam here very shortly to participate in Exercise Milan. And we see the world's oldest democracy and the world's largest democracy more and more finding that their interests are converging against those that would upend the international rules-based order. And India is a most ardent supporter of the international rules-based order. Australia, we have the advantage of a treaty ally. It is a treaty alliance. And that partnership is also deepening as well in the most recent AUKUS arrangement. There's a great deal of interoperability that exists already between the United States and Australia. And you'd be hard-pressed aboard an Australian DDG to see a profound difference between an Arleigh Burke-class DDG. And you see the work ahead, a period of consultation en route to the potential of a nuclear submarine, and then our maritime patrol and reconnaissance aircraft, our fighter forces, all of those forces more and more converge into being a more allied and cooperative thing. In fact, I now have a deputy director of operations who in every way is an operations officer that leads every single day in our headquarters. Not a liaison officer, but an embed that in every way acts with the full authority that an American officer would every single day. And these are roadmaps that are going to lead us to, if the time comes that a deeper military arrangement follows the diplomatic arrangement that today is the Quad, that we have a duty to be ready to find those elements of convergence so we can be more effective, just as we are with Japan today, just as we are with Australia today, and we and India hope to deepen those, that element of cooperation as well. Thanks for the question, Bill.
That was the final question.
Okay.
Please welcome General Fredenberg back to the stage.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Admiral, for those comments. On behalf of AFCEA and the U.S. Naval Institute, I wanted to present a book to you as a small token of our appreciation, The Sailor's Bookshelf by Admiral James Stavridis. Thank you very much.
Thanks again.
Thank you all for attending today's lunch. We're now moving into a dessert break in the exhibit hall. Looking at the rest of today's program, you'll see that we have one more panel session beginning at 2:30. The topic is, have we made sufficient progress in securing our networks and bringing on JADC2? That panel is sponsored by GDIT. Additionally, several sessions will be held throughout the remainder of the afternoon in the various exhibit halls theater spaces. We have a few networking opportunities this afternoon. From 3:30 to 4:30, there will be a reception in the exhibit hall sponsored by Akima, Aqua Security, Nokia, Taito Athene, and Vion. If you didn't use your drink ticket provided by Red River Technologies yesterday, you'll find it in the badge holder. Then at 4 p.m., the Women in AFCEA Appreciation event will begin right here in Hall D with a light networking reception, followed by a keynote session from Rear Admiral Carol List, and will culminate with the presentation of the AFCEA Women's Appreciation Awards. Everyone is encouraged to attend.